The challenge begins. The cold metal walls of the warship hummed with energy as High Commander Zorica walked through the corridor. She was tall, strong, and feared across the galaxy. Her people, the Zephyrians, had conquered many planets. They ruled with power, and no one dared to challenge them. But now they had captured something strange. Not a warrior from a mighty empire, not a being with advanced weapons. A human. Zorica had heard about humans before, a small, weak species from a distant planet called Earth. The Zephyrians had never fought them before. They were considered unimportant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But this particular human was different. He had been found alone on a distant moon, surviving for weeks with no food supply, no armor, and no weapons. When her soldiers had tried to take him, he fought back. And he won. The reports said he used his intelligence, his speed, and his strange, unpredictable fighting style to take down 6 Zephyrian warriors before they finally overpowered him. Zorica wanted to see him for herself. She stepped into the prison chamber, where the human was being held. The room was dim, filled with the soft hum of energy restraints. In the center, chained to the wall, sat the human. He was tall for his kind, with short brown hair and sharp blue eyes. His body was covered in bruises, but his face showed no fear. Zorica narrowed her glowing violet eyes. Every prisoner who entered this room trembled before her. Even the strongest warriors in the galaxy begged for mercy. But this human, he smirked. The small, confident smile on his lips made her grip tighten around her weapon. "You are Ethan Carter, from Earth, correct?" Zorica said, her voice cold and commanding. The human tilted his head slightly, then chuckled. "That's what they call me." Zorica's expression remained unreadable. She stepped closer, towering over him. "Do you know where you are, human?" Ethan's blue eyes studied her carefully. "On a ship. Big, clean, smells like metal. And judging by the way your guards look at me, I'd say they're not used to humans giving them trouble." She ignored the insult. "You are now a prisoner of the Zephyrian Empire. You will tell us everything you know." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Everything? That's a lot. I know how to make coffee. I know how to fix a broken radio. Oh, and I know that you're trying really hard to scare me, but it's not working." Zorica's eyes flashed with anger. She had broken kings, warlords, and assassins before. They had all cracked under her gaze. But this human, he was playing with her. She leaned closer, her voice turning sharp. "You think this is a game? We could break you in seconds. We could make you suffer in ways you can't imagine." Ethan's smirk widened. "Oh, I can imagine a lot. But the thing is, you won't." Zorica frowned. "And why is that?" Ethan leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, his voice calm but powerful. "Because I'm human. And humans don't break easily." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zorica felt something unexpected. Intrigue. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked into her eyes without fear. This human was not just resisting. He was toying with her. She straightened, her expression unreadable once again. "Very well, human. If you do not fear me, let's see how long that lasts." She turned and pressed a button on the wall. The energy restraints around Ethan's wrists tightened, sending a pulse of pain through his body. His muscles tensed, but he didn't scream. Zorica watched, waiting for a reaction. Ethan only gritted his teeth, then laughed. The sound echoed through the chamber, sharp and full of amusement. "That's it. I expected worse." Zorica's fingers curled into fists. This was going to be interesting. As she walked out of the chamber, she gave him one last look. This human was different, and she would enjoy breaking him. The mind games begin. The warship hummed with energy, its massive engines pushing it through the endless void of space. Inside the prison chamber, Ethan Carter sat in his restraints, watching the cold metal ceiling above him. The energy cuffs around his wrists pulsed with a soft blue glow, but he barely noticed them. He had been in worse situations. Much worse. The door slid open with a sharp hiss, and High Commander Zarica stepped in. She carried herself with the confidence of a ruler, her armor polished, her violet eyes gleaming with authority. 2 heavily armed Cypherian guards followed behind her, their weapons trained on him. Ethan smirked. They were scared of him. Not that they'd admit it. Zarica stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. You are an unusual creature, human. Ethan stretched his fingers slightly, testing the cuffs. I get that a lot. She ignored the remark. I have conquered over 30 civilizations. I have broken the minds of kings and warlords. They all thought they were strong. She leaned forward slightly. And yet, here you are, acting as if you are in control. Ethan held her gaze, calm and confident. Because I am. One of the guards shifted nervously, gripping his weapon tighter. Zarica noticed. It annoyed her. She took a slow breath, letting her voice drop into something colder. We will see how long that lasts. She turned to the guards. Prepare the chamber. The guards obeyed immediately, pressing a series of controls on the wall. A deep humming sound filled the room, and the floor beneath Ethan's feet shifted, revealing metallic plates that began to glow with an eerie red light. Ethan felt it before he saw it. The heat. It rose slowly, at first just a warmth against his boots, then hotter, until it started burning. His cuffs tightened automatically, ensuring he couldn't move his feet. Zarica watched him carefully. She had used this method before. Heat stimulation was a simple but effective technique. Most species panicked quickly, their survival instincts taking over. Ethan. He yawned. Zarica narrowed her eyes. You seem unimpressed. Ethan wiggled his fingers in the cuffs. This is what? A warm-up. Zarica gave a small smile. She liked his resistance. It made things more interesting. The heat intensified. The metal under his feet turned a bright orange, the temperature reaching levels that would have melted the flesh of weaker species. Sweat rolled down Ethan's face. But still, he remained silent. Most beings screamed by now. Most beings begged. Ethan only gave her a small, amused smile. This is cute, really. He tilted his head. But if you wanted me barefoot on hot metal, you could have just asked. Zarica's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity. You enjoy this, don't you? She asked. Ethan shrugged. Not really. But I've been through worse. The heat reached a critical level, enough to burn through his boots if it continued. But still, he didn't break. Zarica studied him. There was no panic in his eyes, no fear. And then she realized it. He wasn't resisting out of stubbornness. He was playing with her. She pressed a button, and the heat vanished instantly. The floor cooled, the red glow fading away. Ethan let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as if nothing had happened. Zarica stepped closer. You confuse me, human. You do not show pain. You do not beg. Ethan looked up at her. Because you're doing it wrong. For the first time in her life, Zarica hesitated. Something about him, his confidence, his absolute refusal to be controlled, unnerved her. She had expected fear, maybe even arrogance. But this was something else. She straightened. We are not finished, Carter. There are many ways to break a person. Ethan smiled. And I look forward to seeing you try. Zarica turned sharply and left the chamber, the guards following behind her. As the door hissed shut, one of the guards spoke. Commander, he is dangerous. Zarica didn't answer. Because for the first time in her life, she felt it too. Not just danger. Excitement. The tables turn. The warship's command chamber was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Zarica stood before the holo display, her violet eyes narrowed as she replayed the footage from the prison chamber. She watched the human, Ethan Carter, again. He was chained, tortured, and still, he smirked. It made no sense. Most species, when faced with Zephyrian interrogation, broke within minutes. Their minds shattered before their bodies did. Even the strongest warriors eventually collapsed into fear and obedience. But Ethan, he laughed in the face of pain. He taunted her, and worst of all, she couldn't stop thinking about him. It was unacceptable. Her second-in-command, General Voskar, a broad-shouldered Zephyrian warrior, watched the footage beside her. His scaled arms were crossed, his expression filled with disapproval. "Commander," Voskar said, his deep voice careful, "this human is different. I have seen elite fighters, assassins, warlords, but none like him." He paused, then added, "He is dangerous." Zarika didn't look away from the screen. "I know." Voskar hesitated. "We should execute him." Zarika's fingers tightened slightly at the suggestion, though she didn't know why. "No, not yet." Voskar frowned. "Why? You have tried to break him, and he only grows stronger. Keeping him alive is because I am not finished with him." Her voice was sharp, final. Voskar hesitated, then nodded. He knew better than to question her further. Zarika turned off the holo display and exhaled slowly. This was no longer just about interrogation. This was about control. And she would make sure Ethan Carter understood who ruled here. Inside the prison chamber, Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold floor, hands still bound in the energy cuffs. He wasn't worried. He had studied people like Zarika before, leaders who believed themselves invincible, who thought power came from control, fear, and pain. She was trying to break him. She didn't realize she was already losing. The door hissed open, and she entered. No guards this time. Just her. Ethan looked up with a slow, lazy smirk. "Missed me already?" Zarika stepped forward, her boots echoing in the small chamber. "You think this is amusing, don't you?" Ethan tilted his head. "You're here alone. That means you want something." She didn't react. Instead, she reached for her belt and pressed a button. The cuffs around Ethan's wrists clicked open and retracted. For the first time since his capture, Ethan was free to move. He rubbed his wrists and stretched his arms before looking at her. "Now this is interesting." Zarika remained calm, but there was a flicker of something in her expression. Curiosity. Challenge. She gestured to the center of the room. "Stand." Ethan slowly got to his feet, rolling his shoulders. "You really should be more careful, letting a dangerous human loose in your own warship." Zarika smirked. "You will not escape, and even if you tried, I would stop you." Ethan chuckled. "You sound very sure of yourself." Zarika stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "You intrigue me, human. You should be afraid. You should be begging for mercy. Instead, you act as if you are the one in control." Ethan held her gaze. "Because I am." Silence. For the first time, she did not have a response. She felt something in that moment. Something she didn't like. A shift. A disturbance in the balance of power. She had come here to assert her dominance, to remind him who was in control. But instead, she felt like the one being tested. Zarika's jaw tightened slightly. "You are not in control. I am. I decide whether you live or die. I decide what happens next." Ethan smiled. "Then prove it." Zarika's eyes flashed. "Very well. Let's play a different game." She pressed another button, and the walls shifted. The prison chamber's metal panels retracted, revealing a new setting. A combat arena. Weapons rose from compartments in the floor, and the room expanded into a circular space. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Ah, so this is where the fun begins." Zarika stepped back, unstrapping her energy blade from her side. It ignited with a low hum, the sharp violet light casting shadows across her face. "Fight me, human. Let's see if your confidence is truly earned." Ethan rolled his neck, shaking out his arms. "You sure about this? What happens when you lose?" Zarika let out a small, dangerous laugh. "I do not lose." Ethan picked up a small combat knife from the weapons rack, testing its weight. Well, this should be fun. The air between them crackled with tension. This was no longer an interrogation, no longer a prisoner versus his captor. This was something different, something dangerous, and neither of them wanted to stop. A dangerous attraction. The combat arena was silent except for the hum of Zarika's energy blade. Its violet glow pulsed, casting shifting shadows across the metallic walls. Ethan Carter stood across from her, his stance relaxed but ready, a simple combat knife twirling between his fingers. His expression wasn't serious. It was amused, as if this wasn't a fight to the death, but a game. Zarika hated that. She hated how he never showed fear. She hated how she wanted to see what he would do next. "Are you going to fight?" she asked coldly. Ethan tilted his head slightly, then smirked. "I don't know. Are you going to try and win? Because so far, I don't think you believe you can." A spark of anger flared in her chest, but she pushed it down. This was not a game. She rushed forward, her energy blade slicing through the air toward his chest. Faster than expected, he dodged. Not stepped back. Not blocked. Dodged. His body shifted with fluid precision, his movements almost effortless. Her blade barely missed him by inches. Zarika narrowed her eyes. He was toying with her again. She attacked again, her strikes faster, sharper. Ethan weaved between them, his reflexes almost unnatural. Every time she swung, he evaded, moving just enough to avoid the blade, but never countering. She pressed harder, increasing her speed. Faster, stronger, unrelenting. And still, he smirked at her. Zarika spun, aiming a high kick to his ribs. This time, he caught her ankle midair, his grip firm but controlled. For the first time, she felt his strength, not brute force, but controlled power. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, without breaking eye contact, Ethan released her and took a step back. Zarika's chest rose and fell, frustration burning beneath her skin. "You refuse to fight me. Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Because this isn't a fight. It's a test. You're testing me, and you're testing yourself." She stiffened. How did he know that? He watched her too closely, read her movements too well. It was unsettling. No, it was infuriating. "You're afraid, aren't you?" he said suddenly. Her grip on the energy blade tightened. "Of you?" Ethan shook his head. "No, you're afraid of what happens when you lose control." Zarika felt a sharp pulse in her chest. She lunged again, this time with real rage behind her attack. Ethan finally countered, catching her wrist before the energy blade could reach him. For a brief second, she felt trapped, like the power had shifted entirely into his hands. She was the warrior, the conqueror, the one who dominated. And yet, Ethan Carter stood in front of her, unmoved, unshaken, and looking at her as if he understood her better than she understood herself. "Let go." Her voice was sharp, demanding. Ethan didn't move. "Say please." Her eyes flared with rage, and something else, something dangerous. She wrenched her hand free and took a step back, glaring at him. "You enjoy this, don't you?" she accused. Ethan gave a small, slow smile. "I enjoy watching you realize that you don't have the control you think you do." The words hit harder than any strike ever had, because they were true. For the first time in her life, Zarika felt off balance. She had come into this fight to assert dominance, to break him, to prove humans were weak. And yet, she was the one whose mind was unraveling. She didn't know how to break him, because she was beginning to not want to. She turned off her energy blade and stepped back. "Enough." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Surrendering already?" Her jaw clenched. "I do not surrender." Could have fooled me. Her fingers twitched, half tempted to attack again, half tempted to. She shut down the thought immediately. "Return to your cell." Ethan nodded as if he had already won. "Of course, Commander." He walked past her without hesitation, as if he trusted she wouldn't strike him from behind. Zarika hated that he was right. As the door shut behind him, she exhaled slowly, realizing for the first time that she had been holding her breath. Elsewhere on the warship, Ethan sat in his cell, stretching his arms. His body still ached from the heat torture, but he had endured worse. This was not about pain. It was about control, and he was winning. Zarika was fascinated by him now. He could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. She wanted to understand him. And once curiosity replaced fear, control shifted. "How's our fearless commander doing?" Ethan muttered to himself with a smirk. The door hissed open. Zarika stood there, alone. For the first time, she looked unsure. Not weak, not broken, but no longer certain of who was in control anymore. "You're not like the others, Carter." Her voice was softer, calculating. Ethan leaned back against the wall. "Took you long enough to notice." She stepped closer, staring at him as if searching for an answer. "What do you want?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "The real question is, what do you want, Commander?" She had no answer, and that terrified her more than anything else ever had. Breaking the warlord. Zarika stood in the dim light of Ethan Carter's cell, arms crossed, her violet eyes studying him. She should have left. She should have walked away. But she didn't. She couldn't. Something about this human had drawn her back here. Something infuriating. Something uncontrollable. Ethan sat casually on the bench, unrestrained, his hands resting on his knees as if he belonged there, as if this was his worship, not hers. His blue eyes watched her with quiet amusement, and that damned smirk never left his lips. "You're thinking too hard, Commander," Ethan finally said, his voice calm but teasing. Zarika stiffened. "Do not assume to know my thoughts, human." "Oh, I don't assume." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked onto hers. "I know." Silence stretched between them. She should have snapped at him, ordered the guards to take him away. But she didn't. Instead, she asked something she never thought she would. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Ethan smiled, tilting his head. "Because you don't scare me." Her fingers twitched. She had broken warriors, kings, and warlords before. She had made the strongest beings in the galaxy beg. And yet this human sat before her, untamed, unshaken. "I could kill you, Carter. Right now." "I know." Zarika frowned. "Then why?" "Because you won't." Ethan said it so casually, so certainly, that she actually hesitated. And he saw it. "See? That right there. That's why you keep coming back." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "This isn't about power anymore. This is about something else." She scoffed, ignoring the strange tightness in her chest. "You think I enjoy your company?" Ethan smirked. "I think you don't know what to do with me." Her jaw clenched. She hated how easily he read her. So she did something she had never done before. She sat down across from him. For the first time, she put herself on his level. The warlord and the prisoner. But in this moment, she wasn't sure who was truly in control anymore. Meanwhile, in the control room, General Voskar watched the security feed. His golden reptilian eyes narrowed. The High Commander had returned to the human cell again. And now, she was talking to him, sitting with him. This was wrong. This was dangerous. He turned to his officers. "Erase this footage. Now." A soldier hesitated. "But General," the council ordered. "Erase it." Voskar's voice was cold, final. The soldier obeyed, pressing a series of buttons. The screen flickered, and the security log vanished. Voskar exhaled slowly. This human was becoming a problem. And if Zarika did not see it soon, he would be forced to make a decision she would not like. Back in the cell, Zarika sat across from Ethan, her fingers tapping against the metal table between them. She had spent her entire life controlling others. And now, for the first time, she was questioning herself. "What are you thinking, Carter?" she finally asked. Ethan stretched his arms, leaning back, I'm thinking about how you're supposed to be my captor, but you're the one who seems trapped." Her eyes narrowed. "Trapped? You built a cage, Zarika. A perfect little empire where everyone fears you, obeys you, and never questions you." He leaned forward. "But now, for the first time, someone isn't playing by your rules, and you don't know what to do." Her breath hitched, because he was right. For the first time, she was truly challenged. And she liked it. Zarika pushed back from the table and stood. "I should kill you," she said, though there was no conviction in her voice. Ethan smirked again. "And yet, here I am." She turned away, her mind a storm of emotions she couldn't process. She walked out of the room, the door hissing shut behind her. But even as she stepped into the corridor, even as she tried to push away his words, she realized something terrifying. She wanted to go back. She wanted to keep talking to him. And worse, she didn't want to break him anymore. She wanted to understand him. Or maybe she just wanted him. The ultimate betrayal. The warship's corridors pulsed with cold, artificial light. High Commander Zarika walked swiftly, her mind an unsteady storm of thoughts. She never hesitated, never questioned, until now. The human, Ethan Carter, had done something no prisoner had ever done before. He had made her uncertain, not of her power, not of her authority, but of herself. For the first time, she didn't know what she wanted. Did she want to break him? Did she want to understand him? Or did she want something more? Her fingers twitched at the thought, and she forced herself to focus. This was dangerous territory. She needed to get control back. But just as she reached the command chamber doors, she felt it. A presence. She turned sharply, her hand moving to her weapon. General Vosker stood in the shadows, watching her. His golden reptilian eyes were unreadable, but his stance, stiff, calculating, was that of a warrior about to strike. Zarika narrowed her eyes. "Is there a reason you're lurking in the dark, General?" Vosker stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing in the silent hall. "I am concerned, Commander." She didn't respond, because she already knew what this was about. "The crew is whispering," Vosker continued. "They say you have been distracted, that you have spent too much time with the human." Zarika's jaw tightened. "I do not answer to whispers." Vosker tilted his head. "No, but you answer to the Dominion Council, and they have seen enough." Zarika's pulse quickened. "Explain." Vosker's next words were cold as steel. "They have ordered his execution, effective immediately." Silence. For the first time, Zarika felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. A tightness, a pressure. She did not react. She did not let her face betray anything. But deep inside, she felt rage. "You overstep, Vosker." Her voice was sharp, dangerous. "I did not authorize this." Vosker did not flinch. "You didn't have to. They see what is happening, even if you refuse to admit it." Zarika's grip on her blade tightened. Because she knew. She knew what he meant. She had let Ethan live too long. She had let herself get too close. And now, the council believed she was compromised. "They think you are weak." "Commander," Vosker pressed, his tone laced with accusation. "You have never hesitated before. You have never let a prisoner live this long." Zarika's voice was a blade. "Because he is useful." Vosker took another step forward. "No, because he has gotten into your head." Zarika did not move. Because she could not deny it. The truth stood between them like a silent, unspoken challenge. And she hated it. "The execution is happening now," Vosker said. "I suggest you do not interfere." Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared down the corridor. The moment he was gone, Zarika's hands curled into fists. Her entire body burned with fury. Not just at Vosker. Not just at the council. But at herself. Because the moment he had said the words, the moment he had told her Ethan was going to die, she had felt something she had never felt before. panic, and that was unacceptable. Inside the execution chamber, Ethan Carter stood in the center of a circular arena, his hands bound in reinforced restraints. A row of Zephyrian soldiers stood around him, their weapons trained on his chest. He was calm. Not because he wasn't aware of the situation, but because he had expected this. It had been a matter of time before someone like Vosker decided he was too dangerous to keep alive. But there was one thing they didn't understand. Ethan Carter was always 2 steps ahead. Vosker stepped onto the platform above, looking down at him. "Human, your games are over. You will die here." Ethan smirked, because in that moment, the room exploded into chaos. The lights flickered and died. The energy field holding his restraints failed. And suddenly, everything turned in his favor. The guards spun around in confusion, shouting orders. But Ethan moved. With speed that should not have been possible, he broke free, grabbing the nearest guard, and using his own weapon against him. A pulse shot rang out. A soldier fell. Then another. The execution had become a battlefield in seconds. And at the center of it all, Ethan Carter was smiling. The rescue. Zerika moved like a shadow through the chaos, cutting down soldiers as she went. She had made her choice. She didn't care what the council thought. She didn't care what it meant for her rule. She only knew one thing. She would not let him die. She reached the execution chamber just as Ethan took down the last guard. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the smoke and chaos. And for the first time, neither of them spoke, because they didn't have to. Zerika tossed him a weapon. "Come with me. Now." Ethan caught it easily, his smirk widening. "Didn't think you cared, Commander." Zerika's voice was cold, but her eyes burned. "Shut up and move." Side by side, they fought their way out. And in that moment, Zerika knew. She wasn't just saving him. She was choosing him. And nothing in the universe would ever be the same again. Escape and a new destiny. Alarms screamed through the warship's metallic halls, flashing red lights bathing everything in an ominous glow. High Commander Zerika and Ethan Carter moved swiftly through the chaos, their footsteps quick but controlled. Soldiers ran in every direction, searching for the traitor and the human, unaware that their prey was already 2 steps ahead. Ethan walked beside her, his stolen weapon firmly in his grip, but he wasn't just following her lead. He was watching her. There was something different about Zerika now. The way she moved, the sharp focus in her eyes. She had made a choice. Not just to help him. Not just to betray the Dominion. But to leave everything behind. And she hadn't hesitated. Ethan smirked, dodging around a corner as the 2 of them slipped into a maintenance shaft. Zerika sealed the door behind them, and for a brief moment, the blaring alarms became muffled. Finally, he turned to her. "So, Commander, what's the plan?" Zerika took a slow breath, her mind working through a dozen scenarios. "We need to get off this ship before Vosker regroups. The hangar bay is heavily guarded, but there's an escape route through the lower engineering deck." Ethan leaned against the wall, watching her. "Funny. You say we now. I thought I was just a prisoner." Zerika's violet eyes locked onto his, sharp but unreadable. "Do not make me regret this, Carter." Ethan grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." She turned away, pressing a control panel that opened a hidden maintenance corridor leading deeper into the ship. They moved swiftly, silent as shadows, as the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. But as they walked, Ethan finally spoke the unspoken truth between them. "You didn't just save me. You chose me." Zerika froze mid-step. The words hit harder than any blade. For a long moment, she didn't turn around. Then, slowly, she faced him. "You think I made this choice for you?" Ethan met her gaze, unwavering. "I think you made it for yourself, and that scares you more than anything." Zerika's hands curled into fists. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but she couldn't, because he was right. She had spent her life believing in control, dominance, and power. But now she had thrown it all away. For what? For a human who had never feared her. For a challenge she had never faced before. For freedom. She turned away sharply. Keep moving. We are not safe yet. Ethan watched her for another second, then nodded. Whatever you say, Commander. General Voskar's betrayal. On the warship's command deck, General Voskar stood before the holo-display, his golden eyes narrowed. The High Commander was gone. Not just fighting against orders, she had abandoned the Dominion entirely. She had chosen the human over her own empire. And that was unforgivable. A Zypherian officer approached, hesitant. General, our forces are searching the lower decks, but we believe the commander may attempt to steal a ship. Voskar exhaled sharply. Let them try. Lock down all external systems. I will deal with this personally. He turned, his heavy boots echoing through the chamber as he walked toward the armory. If Zerika wanted to abandon her people for a human, so be it. But he would make sure neither of them left this ship alive. The final battle. Hangar Bay escape. The Hangar Bay loomed ahead. Zerika and Ithan's final obstacle. Rows of small fighter ships sat lined up, engines cold. Armed guards patrolled the area, their weapons drawn. Zerika studied the area. Too many of them. We need a distraction. Ethan smirked, stepping forward. On it. Before she could stop him, he grabbed a grenade from a fallen soldier's belt, yanked the pin, and tossed it straight into a fuel station. Boom! The entire hangar shook, flames erupting as the explosion sent guards scattering in panic. Zerika turned to him, eyes narrowed. That was reckless. Ethan grinned. That was effective. She had no argument. The two of them raced through the chaos, weaving between cover as the Dominion soldiers regrouped. Zerika's blade cut through armor, while Ethan's stolen rifle dropped targets with deadly precision. They reached a sleek black stealth cruiser, its engines already primed for launch. But just as they stepped onto the ramp, a massive force slammed into them. Zerika was thrown back against the ship's hull, pain exploding in her ribs. Ethan hit the floor, rolling into a defensive stance. Standing between them and freedom, General Voskar. His energy blade hummed, its glow reflecting off his battle armor. This is where it ends, Commander, Voskar growled, his voice filled with venom. You chose a human over your own people. You are no longer fit to lead. Zerika pulled herself to her feet, fire burning in her eyes. Then I will not lead, but I will not let you take him. Voskar lunged. And the final battle began. The showdown. Blades clashed in a flurry of sparks and steel. Voskar was a warrior, stronger and heavier, but Zerika was faster, sharper, more precise. Ethan circled the fight, waiting for an opening, his eyes locked onto Zerika. She was fighting differently now. Not like a commander protecting her empire, but like a woman defending something she refused to lose. The moment Voskar made the smallest mistake, Zerika struck, her blade slicing through his armor's weak point. Voskar staggered, blood dripping from his side. His golden eyes widened in disbelief. You would betray everything. For a human. Zerika stepped forward, pressing her blade to his throat. I did not betray my people. I only refused to be their puppet. Voskar collapsed, his body hitting the ground. Ethan exhaled. Remind me never to piss you off, Commander. Zerika turned to him. Get in the ship. Now. Ethan grinned. After you. They raced aboard, the ship's engines roaring to life. As Dominion reinforcements poured into the hangar, the cruiser blasted into space, vanishing into the void. A new destiny. Silence filled the cockpit. For the first time, they were free. Zerika sat in the pilot's seat, staring out at the endless stars. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So, what now? She glanced at him, something new in her gaze. Now, we see what happens next. Ethan smirked. Together. Zerika didn't hesitate. Together. As the ship vanished into the stars, neither of them looked back. Because for the first time in both their lives, they weren't running from something. They were running towards something new.